Today, I wanted to talk about what I hope that Dave Filoni learns from his two predecessors as head of Lucasfilm. The first, obviously, being his mentor, George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, and then the second, the CEO and head of Lucasfilm over the last 11 years, Kathleen Kennedy. And I think that there's some good things and bad things that he can learn from each of them. And I know most people are going to think that on the Kathleen Kennedy side, it's going to be all negative. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that don't remember history very well, who thinks that everything was positive on the George Lucas front. And those are the people that a lot of them, I think, are the same people that were the reason why George Lucas wanted to get out of Star Wars in the first place. And but I think that there's some really good things that Filoni can learn from both of them. And if he does that, I think he can be really successful as the head of Lucasfilm, at least on the creative side of things. And let's start with, George Lucas. First of all, I think just his experience with working with Lucas in Clone Wars is probably, if he just takes that experience and runs with it, I think that's the right direction to go with Star Wars. Because George Lucas's biggest problem is that he's a masterful storyteller, world builder, and all that. He's just not a good writer, especially when it comes to dialogue, and he's not a good director of human beings. I think that there's a difference between being the director of the whole project and then also being the person that's directing how he wants the actors to say their lines and not only say their lines but act physically. And I think that if you know anything, and if you really paid attention, George Lucas just kind of always struggled with those things, even to the point where I think I've seen where the main cast, Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford, would kind of joke about how they had to almost compensate in some ways for George Lucas's shortcomings on the original trilogy. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure I saw something about that. And that's not even really the big point, is that those just aren't his strong points. Yet in the Clone Wars is where, he had a staff, including Filoni, to handle the actual creative and the day-to-day operation stuff, which allowed George Lucas to focus on the bigger picture. And I think that's where he really did it well. And I think that if Filoni takes that and says, I'm going to be that George Lucas there, I'm going to have the right people in charge of projects, I'm going to have the right writers and all that, then I think that Star Wars could be in the best shape that it's been in a long, long time. It may be ever, to be honest with you. But if he tries to have too much control, if he, as the head of Lucasfilm, if he's still the writer and director on the third film that's coming up after The Mandalorian, Grogu, and Starfighter, if he's the director and writer or sole writer on that project, I'll be a little worried. If we find out that it's still going to be the same movie, or pretty much the same movie as what he was going to do before, but now that he's the head of Lucasfilm, he's going to hire writers to come in and clean up the script. And he's going to have somebody else direct it that's maybe a little bit better at directing live action. I'll be very happy with that, and I'm really hoping that's kind of the direction that he goes. So those are the things I really want him to learn from George Lucas. Now, on the other hand, I think there's a little bit more that he can learn from Kathleen Kennedy. Unfortunately, with her, I think it's more on the negative side of things. He needs to learn that there needs to be a plan. One thing that George Lucas did really well, I think, at least in the original trilogy, is that I think that there was a overall kind of a feel for where the story was going to go overall. And we know that, he changed a lot of things up after A New Hope or the original Star Wars. But you can always just tell that there was an overall story, an arc for everything that he was going to go with, and especially the prequel trilogy, for all the issues with the prequel trilogy and maybe some of the bad writing. There was definitely a game plan involved with it. He just should have hired writers and directors for those films. But with Kathleen Kennedy, it was very obvious with the sequel trilogy. There was no plan. There was no blueprint for what the story was going to be overall. And, you know, with Kathy, you didn't want her to be the person to have that plan. You didn't want her to be the person that's going to be creatively decide what that was going to be. But the fact that, I mean, even if it was J.J. Abrams in the beginning, or maybe if she had decided it was going to be J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson doing the first two movies, sitting them down from the beginning and plotting out the first three movies and getting an idea of what that was going to be, and then for her to be able to come back and okay that and say, you know, put her signature on it and say, I like that game plan, would have been a lot better than what ended up happening, which was Force Awakens comes out and it got a little bit of pushback, even though it was very popular and people really overall seemed to like it. It got some pushback on playing it too safe, and then they seemed to over compensate for it on the other end with Last Jedi, and then that took a lot of, you know, gruff from people that said that it was too not Star Wars, and then they overcompensated way back the other way with The Rise of Skywalker and just made pure trash on that. Like, that's the only one of the Star Wars movies that I can look at and say what was the purpose on it. So with Kathleen Kennedy, I think he needs to learn that they need to have a game plan, and preferably it's something that he has in his head, kind of like what Kevin Feige does for the overall MCU, or if he brings along some of the other people that he has played, you know, his Star Wars toys with over the years. And you know, Sam Witwer's going to be starring in Maul, what is it, Shadow Lord, and he's a wealth of knowledge. So he's got people that he can really sit there and have conversations with about Star Wars and get a overall game plan for what the franchise is going to be in the future. And I think if he does that, and then not only that, you know, Kathleen Kennedy was good at, she made some good decisions on Andor, and she's obviously somebody that knows how to put the pieces together to make the movie that a director or producer is going to say, this is the movie I want to make, and she knows how to go and get the pieces together that they need for that. And I think that's where was Linwood Brenner. I don't pay as close attention, just like I don't pay as close attention to Peter Safran from DC as I do James Gunn, because I'm way more interested in the creative side of these things or whatever. But he's got his co-CEO that I think is going to be able to handle a lot more of that other part of it, to where he could just literally just focus on what's the game plan, what does Star Wars look like in 5 to 10 years, and what's the overall story we're trying to tell here. And I think if he just, you know, once again, on the George Lucas front, I realize that he needs to know what his strengths and weaknesses are, and then hire people to compensate for his weaknesses. And then on the Kathleen Kennedy side, realize that he just has to have a fucking game plan.